What if the single thing we've been taught to avoid, weakness, risk, emotional exposure, is actually the pathway to courage, connection, and meaning? Imagine standing in an arena. You're sweaty, unpolished, maybe a little terrified. People watch. You may fail. You may be celebrated. Theodore Roosevelt called that person the man in the arena. Brené Brown calls it daring greatly, choosing to show up fully despite the risk of being seen. Today we'll unpack daring greatly, a roadmap grounded in research that teaches us why vulnerability is not weakness, how shame and scarcity shape our lives, and what it takes to step in a wholehearted living. My adventures in the arena. Brené opens by confessing what many of us feel. Vulnerability feels excruciating. She describes a personal journey, from a Texan upbringing that valued lock and load, toughness, to becoming a researcher who studies connection, shame, and vulnerability. Her story is honest. She left a corporate career, studied social work, and set out to measure connection. Over years of interviews and data, she discovered a single thing that separated people who felt they belonged from those who didn't: a deeply held sense of worthiness. The people she calls wholehearted didn't have easier lives. They had practices that helped them believe they were enough. Brené also recounts her terrifying but transformative experience giving a TED Talk, an act of daring greatly that made her vulnerable in front of millions. The reaction, while exposing, proved that showing up and being authentic connects people. That paradox, that we crave vulnerability in others but fear it in ourselves, becomes the thread of the whole book. Chapter 1: Scarcity. Looking inside our culture of never enough. We live in a culture where our first thought in the morning and our last thought at night is often, I didn't get enough done. I'm not enough. Brené Brown calls this the culture of scarcity. It's not just about money or material things. It's about the deep, collective belief that we are never enough. Never successful enough, never attractive enough, never safe enough. She begins by describing how scarcity has become our default lens. From social media comparisons to corporate environments, we measure worth by productivity, image, and competition. This endless chase for more creates a low-grade fear that hums beneath everything we do. Brené argues that this fear is the enemy of joy, creativity, and connection. Scarcity leads to shame, the voice that whispers, "Who do you think you are?" It drives us to armor up and pretend, rather than risk being seen as less than perfect. She reveals that what we often label as narcissism or entitlement in others is, at its root, a response to shame and scarcity. When people feel unworthy, they either shrink or inflate to protect themselves. Brené offers a simple but profound insight. The opposite of scarcity isn't abundance, it's enoughness. When we begin to believe that who we are and what we have is enough, we stop comparing, stop hustling for worth, and start connecting authentically. Cultivating enough doesn't mean complacency. It means living with gratitude, groundedness, and a sense of internal sufficiency. She outlines how scarcity infects organizations too. You can spot it wherever shame is used to control people, where comparison dominates, or where disengagement is common. Scarcity thrives in silence and competition. Wholeheartedness, on the other hand, grows in cultures that practice gratitude, celebrate vulnerability, and define success as contribution rather than domination. Chapter 2: Debunking the Vulnerability Myths. If vulnerability is the heart of daring greatly, then our biggest obstacle is the set of myths that keep us from it. Brené unpacks 3 major myths that have distorted how we see vulnerability. Myth number 1: vulnerability is weakness. From childhood, we are taught to associate vulnerability with fragility, to hide our fears, our pain, our uncertainty. Yet Brené's research shows that every act of courage, innovation, and love begins with vulnerability. Soldiers stepping into combat, artists sharing their work, parents sending kids to college, all involve uncertainty and emotional exposure. Vulnerability is courage, not its opposite. Myth number 2: I don't do vulnerability. We all experience vulnerability whether we admit it or not. Every time we face risk, uncertainty, or emotional exposure, during job interviews, first dates, tough conversations, we're in vulnerable territory. The only question is whether we face it consciously and courageously, or avoid it through denial and distraction. Myth number 3. Vulnerability means oversharing. True vulnerability is not about dumping raw emotion on everyone around us. It's about intentional openness within trust and boundaries. Brené uses the marble jar metaphor to illustrate trust. Each time someone proves reliable, a marble goes into the jar. Over time, these small moments build a reservoir of trust. Vulnerability shared with people who have not earned marbles is not courage, it's desperation. She also discusses the paradox that we crave vulnerability in others but fear it in ourselves. We love seeing authenticity, someone speaking truth on stage, a leader admitting fault, but we fear that same exposure in our own lives. That's why daring greatly requires redefining vulnerability as bravery in action. Chapter 3. Understanding and combating shame. If vulnerability is the way forward, shame is the wall blocking the path. Brené defines shame as the intensely painful feeling that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Unlike guilt, which says, I did something bad, shame says, I am bad. This distinction is crucial. Guilt can motivate positive change, but shame corrodes our sense of self. Through thousands of interviews, Brené discovered that shame is universal. Everyone experiences it, but few talk about it. Silence and secrecy are its breeding grounds. When left unspoken, shame thrives and shapes how we see ourselves and others. She introduces the concept of shame resilience, the ability to recognize, name, and respond to shame in healthy ways. According to her research, people who demonstrate shame resilience share 4 key practices. Recognize shame and its triggers. Notice when that sinking feeling arises and identify what triggered it. Practice critical awareness. Question the social and cultural expectations that feed shame, perfectionism, appearance standards, productivity obsessions. Reach out. Shame cannot survive empathy. Talking about it with someone trustworthy breaks its grip. Speak shame. Naming shame out loud takes away its power and turns isolation into connection. Brené also exposes the masks we wear to avoid shame. Perfectionism, numbing, people-pleasing, and controlling. These behaviors feel like protection, but ultimately deepen our disconnection. For example, perfectionism is not about striving for excellence. It's a shield against the fear of being judged. Similarly, numbing, through work, food, social media, or alcohol, creates a temporary escape from discomfort, but robs us of joy and authenticity. She underscores the transformative power of empathy. When someone meets our shame story with compassion rather than judgment, the shame begins to dissolve. Empathy says, you're not alone in this. I see you. I've been there too. Chapter 4. The Vulnerability Armory. In this chapter, Brené Brown invites us to take a closer look at the armor we wear every day, the emotional shields we use to protect ourselves from being hurt, rejected, or seen. She calls this collection of defenses the vulnerability armory. These are the habits and strategies we adopt to avoid feeling vulnerable. Yet ironically, they're the very things that block us from connection, creativity, and authenticity. The many forms of armor. Perfectionism is one of the most deceptive forms of armor. It masquerades as diligence and discipline, but is really driven by fear. Fear of judgment, failure, and criticism. Brené points out that perfectionism is not the same as striving for excellence. Excellence is internally motivated. It's about growth and mastery. Perfectionism, on the other hand, is externally motivated. It's about earning approval and avoiding blame. When we armor up with perfectionism, we trade authenticity for acceptance, and that's a bargain that always costs too much. Numbing is another common shield. When life feels overwhelming, we reach for something to dull the discomfort. Food, alcohol, scrolling, work, or even constant busyness. Brené reminds us that we can't selectively numb emotions. When we numb pain, we also numb joy, gratitude, and love. Numbing gives temporary relief, but deepens disconnection in the long run. Then there's foreboding joy, a subtle but powerful defense. It's that uneasy feeling when things are going well, and we immediately imagine something bad happening. We try to protect ourselves from disappointment by rehearsing tragedy. But as Brené explains, foreboding joy steals the sweetness from our happiest moments. The antidote? Gratitude. Instead of bracing for loss, we can ground ourselves in appreciation. Other forms of armor include cynicism, disengagement, and fitting in. Cynicism dismisses vulnerability as naive. Disengagement convinces us that caring too much will hurt. And fitting in is a counterfeit version of belonging. It demands that we change ourselves to be accepted. Real belonging, Brené emphasizes, only happens when we show up as we are. Taking off the armor. Brené encourages us to recognize our personal patterns of protection. We can't grow unless we identify what shields we're hiding behind. Once we see our armor clearly, we can begin to replace it with healthier practices, self-compassion, courage, and connection. She suggests journaling questions like, when do I feel the urge to numb or perfect? What am I trying to protect myself from? These reflections help reveal the deeper fear beneath the armor, the fear of being unworthy or unlovable. Chapter 5. Mind the Gap. Cultivating Change and Closing the Disengagement Divide. In this chapter, Brené shifts from individual vulnerability to how it plays out in communities and organizations. She talks about the gap between our values, what we say we believe, and our behavior, how we actually act. She calls this the disengagement divide. Many of us, in many workplaces, claim to value honesty, empathy, and courage. Yet when it comes time to practice those values, giving real feedback, admitting mistakes, or having tough conversations, we hesitate. That gap erodes trust and creates disconnection. The power of practice. Brené insists that courage and vulnerability are not traits. They're skills that can be learned and practiced. We close the gap between intention and behavior not through slogans or policies, but through daily, messy effort. Real change happens when we model what we expect from others. In leadership, that means showing up with clarity and consistency. In relationships, it means aligning words and actions. When people see authenticity modeled, they feel permission to do the same. She also introduces the concept of shame-based cultures versus wholehearted cultures. In shame-based systems, be it a workplace, school, or family, people are afraid to speak up or make mistakes. In wholehearted systems, vulnerability is seen as a path to growth. Mistakes are learning opportunities, not weapons. Brené offers tangible steps to cultivate wholehearted cultures. Replace blame with accountability. Focus on learning, not punishing. Provide feedback that's specific, kind, and grounded in respect. Create structures where asking for help is a strength, not a weakness. Chapter 6. Disruptive Engagement. Daring to Rehumanize Education and Work. In this chapter, Brené turns her attention to the larger systems that shape us, schools and workplaces. She argues that both have become breeding grounds for scarcity and shame. The pressure to perform, conform, and compete has replaced curiosity, creativity, and connection. The cost of disconnection. In schools, the fear of failing often kills the joy of learning. Students are rewarded for right answers, not brave questions. In workplaces, employees hide mistakes and avoid innovation because the cost of failure is humiliation. The result is disengagement. People stop caring. Brené calls for disruptive engagement, the act of challenging these dehumanizing norms. It means daring to have real conversations about shame, fear, and vulnerability at every level of leadership. Disruptive engagement doesn't mean rebellion for its own sake. It's about restoring humanity and authenticity to how we learn and work. Rehumanizing work and education. She offers concrete examples. Teachers who admit when they don't know an answer create classrooms of curiosity. Leaders who share their own mistakes encourage teams, to take creative risks. Companies that celebrate learning over perfection foster innovation and loyalty. Brené highlights 3 essential elements of rehumanizing systems. Courageous leadership. Leaders must model vulnerability and empathy. Shared language. Talking openly about fear and shame reduces their power. Empathy-driven feedback. Feedback should be constructive, respectful, and growth-focused. By embedding these principles, schools and organizations transform from places of fear to communities of purpose. Chapter 7. Wholehearted Parenting. Daring to be the adults we want our children to be. Parenting, Brené says, is perhaps the ultimate arena of vulnerability. There are no guarantees, no perfect playbook. Every parent must learn to show up with courage and compassion, not control and fear. Parenting from worthiness, not fear. She explains that our children learn who they are by watching how we live. If we want our children to be brave, resilient, and compassionate, we must first model those qualities ourselves. Parenting from scarcity, constantly worrying about mistakes or outcomes, creates anxiety and perfectionism in kids. Parenting from worthiness means trusting that we are enough and that our children are too. Brené emphasizes that love and belonging are not earned through behavior or achievement. They are unconditional. When children feel loved without condition, they develop resilience and self-acceptance. But when love feels conditional, shame takes root. Practical tools for wholehearted parenting. Teach emotional literacy. Help children name and express emotions rather than suppress them. Model vulnerability. Admit when you're wrong. Show them that apologizing is strength, not weakness. Let them struggle. Protecting kids from all pain robs them of resilience. Support them through failure instead of preventing it. Focus on effort, not perfection. Praise persistence and courage over results. Set boundaries with empathy. Boundaries create safety. Empathy preserves connection. The heart of wholehearted parenting. Brené reminds us that parenting is not about raising perfect children. It's about raising children who believe they are worthy of love and belonging. The greatest gift we can offer our kids is our own wholeheartedness. When they see us embracing imperfection, setting boundaries, and showing up authentically, they learn to do the same. Brené closes the book with a powerful call. Daring greatly is not a one-time act, but a commitment to live authentically amid uncertainty. It asks us to pick courage over comfort, connection over scarcity, and vulnerability over armor. She reminds readers that vulnerability is the path to creativity, love, belonging, and meaningful leadership. The work is messy and ongoing, but the payoff is a life lived more fully. Practical takeaways. What you can do tomorrow. Rapid fire. Name your vulnerability. When you feel fear or shame, label it. Naming reduces its power. Check your armory. Identify one protective behavior, perfectionism, numbing, and notice when you use it this week. Start a marble jar. With a friend or partner, list behaviors that build trust. Commit to practicing one this month. Practice brave phrases. Try, "I'm worried that," or "I don't know, but I want to learn." Use them in meetings and tough conversations. Teach process praise. With kids or colleagues, praise effort and strategy, not fixed traits. Set boundaries around disclosure. Be vulnerable with people who have earned the right to hear you. Embrace small experiments. Try one small risk, share a tentative idea, apologize openly, ask for help. The choice in front of us is simple. Stay safe on the sidelines, armored against feeling, or step into the arena, risking failure, ridicule, and heartbreak, for a chance at courage, connection, and meaning. Theodore Roosevelt honored the person in the arena. Brené Brown asks us to be that person not occasionally, but often. Dare greatly. Show up. Be seen. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy, only willing.